going?
And they've got some very prolific and interesting guests on recently. Do you guys watch that show? If you don't, you should definitely get on YouTube and watch it. Very interesting. So I got into Monero about middle of 2000, early 2017, and what I liked about it was, and you'll hear me say this many, many times if you watch the YouTube videos, my other interviews, and I'll say this over and over again. It's very simple. It's very naive, but I think it works. You get privacy all the time on Monero. You hide the sender, you hide the receiver, it hides the amount sent, and you get it all the time on exchanges, on your desktop, on web wallets, on mobile wallets, and it's not optional. All the privacy, all the time. And I've been pushing that as a tagline for Monero, but nobody's catching it. Nobody's using it except me. So when I first got into it, and I wanted to learn more about it, started going online, I kept coming across these papers and PowerPoint presentations by this guy named Samsung Galaxy Player. Yeah, I thought, wow, what a terrible name. So I did a little more research and found out this guy named Justin Ehrenhofer. And so, I mean, I'm still very much a noob in Monero, still learning a lot. Every day is a learning experience. But I would say a big chunk of the knowledge that I do have so far is based off of Justin's papers he's written, and just me bugging him on Reddit or Telegram, sending him questions out of the blue. Hey, what does this mean? What does that mean? And he's very kind to respond. So Justin is very involved in Monero because you guys know he's head of the community work group. He runs 2 online shows, Monero Coffee Chat and Breaking Monero, which just started recently, which was the 7th episode.
Yep.
7th episode with Saran,
Yes.
the Monero Research Lab. He's a student at the University of Minnesota. And what else did I say about you? So before I let Justin speak, usually at these meetups, I'll stand up here and I'll connect my phone and I'll flip through the Cake Wallet screens and show you guys all the new features we put in Cake Wallet. And I think I've done enough of that, and it's quite boring just looking at iPhone screens over and over again. So I'm not going to do that, but I'll just tell you a couple of new features that we do have coming up in Cake Wallet. Address book, we're adding address book. I mean, those people have been asking for that for a long time. They want to be able to save addresses, the contact names of their addresses, not only for Monero, but for Bitcoin and Ethereum and different currencies, you can save addresses. And the second pretty cool feature is iCloud backup. When I said watch it, I didn't mean So iCloud backup. So if you lose your phone or get a new phone or you delete your app, you don't have to sync the whole blockchain again or even unblock hiding. If you save to the iCloud or anywhere, you could save to Google Drive or Dropbox or even to your Telegram account or wherever. If you save that file, you can just restore from it, and it happens like that rather than trying to restore this from the blockchain. So that's all I'm going to say about Cake Wallet. Doug, did you want to say anything about Monero Talk?
No, I mean, it'd be great if you guys tune in, like, subscribe. We try to have community members on the show that we think are making a difference in Monero land. We also talked about Bitcoin as well, but primarily it's all Monero. And I used to be a Bitcoin maximalist, and I slowly moved over to Monero. I hate to call myself a Monero maximalist. I guess I'm more of a digital cash maximalist. So I'm a believer in that one of these things will eventually be digital cash. And right now I think Monero's got the best shot at doing that. So the show is kind of a pursuit along those lines, trying to figure out if Monero is the best. And so we're constantly questioning that and going, trying to figure out if that's the case. So, yeah, tune in, Monero Talk. Thank you.
couple more things. I don't know if you guys came to the Monero party last year, which is by Monero Talk and Cake Wallet during Consensus Week. So we're going to do that again this year. It's going to be in May. Last year we took a space of 100 people and over 250 people RSVP'd. And we had to return their money, return Monero. Just pay by Monero only, and we had to actually refund people. It's crazy. So this year we're going to take double the size, triple the size, and it's going to be awesome. One quick thing, this is something we do at these meetups, is we usually just go around and introduce ourselves. No pressure, you don't have to. If you want to stay anonymous, want to use a fake name, want to give a name, or say skip, you don't have to do it, it's fine. Tell William, he's actually a member of Cake Wallet.
Yeah, I work with Vic. Do not code. I just do handling emails, customer support, type of stuff. Pretty simple. Real name is William. You can find me on Telegram at death.com or on Twitter, death.com. Death.com. It's death. The only zero is dot. D0TCON. Otherwise, it's all letters. That's it.
It's not intimidating for support.
Hi, I'm Saray. I work for Zcash. Go me. Every time I talk the Monero community. But I really like the Monero community. I work for Zcash for almost 2 years now for the business side of things. Yeah, it's more centralized compared with Monero, and we want to be the internet cash. So I wanted to know why you think Monero has a better opportunity of being internet cash. I know our privacy is optional, but we're trying to deprecate the address.
Yeah.
But if you can convert me to
Okay.
the Monero community.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Justin could go into it as well, but I think you hit the nail on the head with your introduction in that you guys are more corporate, so there's that.
I did a more corporate.
Well, there is no Monero Corporation.
That's true.
There is one for Zcash. Monero is kind of is a true open source project that has just kind of grown organically on its own, similar to Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's one.
And you know, obviously the opt-in privacy we see as being a big problem because it's fault. So I know Zcash is working on these things, and Bitcoin is supposedly working on these things as well. But Monero currently has already achieved these things, and so Monero, it is a constant cat and mouse battle. Privacy, you're never 100% private, but we're currently the best in the game, and then just continuing to fight that battle. And then I think there's other points that can be made in the Zcash versus Monero comparison. I think those are the major ones.
Yeah, we're gonna talk later, so.
Yeah, hi, I'm Daniel. I've been a Bitcoin enthusiast and promoter for years, and recently been very interested in Monero. I'll open the floor for rebuttals.
Hi, my name is Andreas. People know me also as a technology artist. I run a little YouTube channel. I'm a filmmaker, media artist, used to be a programmer. Doing interviews with artists, creators, programmers, cryptographers, and all kind of interesting people on YouTube. And I'm just an enthusiast in the cryptocurrency space.
Hello everyone, my name is Chris. I'm a blockchain developer, but I'm still learning, so I'm just here to explore and find out more.
Hello everybody, my name is Eric. I'm a developer. I'm currently working on building libraries for Monero in Java and JavaScript, just to make the Monero daemon and wallet easier to access in those languages.
Hi everyone, I'm Brian. I work mostly on Ethereum smart contract stuff, but I'm really interested in both Monero and the wider ecosystem as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sean. I am the director of the Kobe project, which we will be discussing in detail. So if you have any particular questions, I'd be more than happy to field those for you.
My name is John. It's my real name. Because you're going to dress like this, don't try to pretend. I'm quite good at playing at an event this afternoon. I'm an enthusiast. I'm on Reddit as I miss Usenet. And there's a whole question about what does that mean? I miss Usenet. Okay.
Hey, hello everybody. I'm Philip, and I'm a security researcher.
Hello, I'm Omar. I'm just an enthusiast, and from Austin, Texas.
Jan, I'm interested to learn about Monero.
Hey everyone, I'm Mohan. Currently in a coding bootcamp, so learning how to program, and I like coming to these Monero meetups because I think out of all the meetups, people here are really nice, and I always look at them.
What's up, everybody? My name is Joe. I'm a blockchain enthusiast. I don't know that much about Monero. Fun fact, I heard about it in Bitcoin Miami last January at the 11/11 after party, and it was just pretty interesting.
Hi, I'm JT Brassey. I'm a Monero developer and a number of Monero-related projects.
I'm Albert. I'm just a Monero subreddit lurker.
What's your Reddit name? Okay, so before this start, any questions for me or Doug or Cake Wallet or anybody?
When will be coming on Android?
Sorry? Soon.
Seriously, every time I heard about Cake Wallet, they were giving away Litecoin in Washington Square Park.
Sorry?
They were giving away Litecoin in Washington Square Park. Giving away, as in, here's $1, there's the Litecoin books. And I was like, and before they had set up, I recognized the logo. I said, no, I don't own any Litecoin, I know one thing. I said, here, have some. So they gave me a piece of paper, hard wallet, I said, you can go to Cake Wallet, and it was kind of, I was the whole thing like, hey, you know, you could put it on Cake Wallet, Cake Wallet, here's your free $1 what? The problem is, is it available for Android? Well, not really. Well, now, proper word of Litecoin.
Gee, what, then Light Wallet?
Prices similar.
I think Light Wallet is a Litecoin.
Wolf Wallet is like
Is there a Litecoin aspect to Cake Wallet?
It's funny because you've got
You
bread,
can convert.
loaf, and cake. It's all
You can take
You know what, that is bread wallet. Maybe somebody would make good.
Yeah, look at
you can have a George Floyd one.
It's okay. You can take in Litecoin and it'll convert it to Monero for you.
Nice.
That's the way it should be. So, all right, so without further ado, here we go.
Thanks everyone for coming today. And of course, Vic and all the Cake Wallet team and Sean, the entire Monero Talk team have been very generous at both sponsoring this event and also allowing me to come out here in the first place. I'm still a student at the University of Minnesota, so still have come here. This is the first time in New York, so.
Really?
Yeah.
Welcome to New York.
Play Taylor Swift in the background. Brief introductions is already covered, but within this is all Monero focused. So I'm the organizer of the Monero community work group. There's a meeting going on right now, so Diego is handling that for me at the moment. I also organize the Monero's malware response work group. This is to help people who are victims of cryptojacking and other Monero-related ransomware. So we have resources to help people if they are victimized by some sort of malware to get around it, understand what Monero is in the process, hopefully. I am a board member of MAGIC, which is Multidisciplinary Academic Grants and Cryptocurrencies. Our grant process should be opening up in the next week, where if you are a student studying privacy or cryptocurrency technologies, then you can apply for a grant to help you with that process. So we're giving out 5 grants for this semester, this year. I'm also a moderator of the cryptocurrency subreddit, for better or worse, right? So I help try and improve the quality of discourse on the subreddit. I recently started posting Breaking Monero, and for this Mastering Monero book we have here, I helped with the back-end details. I'll publish it. I did not write the book, but I helped with all the logistical details of making it a reality. So, all the boring stuff out of the way. So let's talk about privacy, right? So a lot of people think of privacy as this on and off switch. They say that, okay, well, either I have privacy or I don't. And I think that looks at the situation far too narrowly, and it's not really realistic in most cases, because you don't know everything about the environment that you're participating in. You don't know if you're being actively surveilled. You don't know if there's cameras in the room or anything. You you don't know those things, so you don't know if you have perfect privacy or not. And if a specific implementation has a privacy feature that is on or off, it doesn't mean that you have privacy or you don't. It's far more nuanced than that. Instead, it kind of looks like this, where it's a spectrum where on one end you have perfect privacy, and on the other end you have perfect transparency. And we don't reach either extreme. In order for it to be perfect there's always some situation you might not have accounted for, or some way you might not have hidden your tracks that in the future people might learn some information, or even suppose if Cake Wallet and every other application was literally perfectly private, you could still get your keys seed away and someone else would still be able to restore from it. So you still have user error at the bare minimum that's preventing you from achieving perfect privacy. And then the other spectrum of perfectly transparent, it has to be accessible everywhere. Who here currently has a Bitcoin node running on their phone or something that they have with them right now? Okay, well, it's not perfectly transparent because you can't immediately pull that information up right now, right? So ultimately, it's important to not just talk about privacy in a sort of extreme of either end, because we're never really going to get to either extreme, but sort of bring us back to ultimately what the use cases are, what your threat model is. This is, what do you need privacy for? Are you simply purchasing a birthday gift for your friend and you don't want them to know before they receive it? You probably don't need to go through a really complex sort of privacy model to make that happen. However, if you live in a country where they have active surveillance and you want to try and avoid that, or if you want to avoid passive surveillance with advertising agencies or other large companies, then you probably need a more strict threat model. It's similar to security, where you don't have perfect security. You can't adopt one level of privacy or security solution and expect it to work for 30 years. You need to adapt, you need to iterate on it and keep adjusting it from there. So when you think of privacy, don't think of it as some extreme, think of it as something that you need to apply to your specific use case, and then we can have a much more realistic conversation about how these different projects provide privacy for you. And Monero is one of those projects that aims to provide privacy for your financial transactions. One thing a lot of people, hopefully in this room, would understand, but outside of this room don't understand, is that with Bitcoin, it's not a high degree of privacy. Every time you spend funds, you need to worry about leaking how much you spend, where the source of funds came from, where you're sending funds to. So I like to say Bitcoin is private if you never use it. If you just have money that appears out of thin air and never spend it, it's private because, ideally no one would know you had it, but the second you start spending it, you make transparent connections to yourself. And again, these are connections like if I take out a $5 bill and give it to someone and sure that person that I give it to knows I gave it to them. I let the entire world know for the history of time that this information is without fault. So it's a totally different ballgame here. And there are some companies that try to parse this data in order to learn insights from it, mostly to help track down criminals and other information, but it also has some limiting effects on people's everyday transactions because you're making all this information public and a lot of people don't understand that. So why is privacy really important? And it's not just important for the sake of I want privacy. That's totally a legitimate reason for why you would want it, because you just want to have it, of course. But there's a lot of practical reasons too. So if we're hiding the sources of funds and other sort of information, you might want to hide your employer info. Maybe you don't want to reveal that you work for a specific company, or that you don't want to reveal who all of your friends are based off how you send funds back and forth, or that you went to your friend's super secret invitation-only party and reimbursed them for it and your other friend didn't go, right? Weird sort of situations like that would be revealed to these sort of individuals. If you're a business, you don't necessarily want to reveal all of your upstream business connections because it's hard to run a business if everyone knows who all of your suppliers are because they can just pull the phone and say, hey, I know you're doing business with my competitor, well, let's read a little bit more into that. I'll pay 5% more, whatever it would take. And then also just the fungibility component. A lot of people think, I'll speak actually a little more on fungibility later, I think that's and then regarding to your expenses, hiding what your expenses are, you don't necessarily want people to know all your political donations or all of the, or if you go to a specialist doctor, for instance, and need to make a medical payment, you're not very private if you need to go to, like, if you're expecting to go to a specialist and now everyone in your family might know. That's not necessarily something you want them to know at that moment. Or even just on a much smaller level, just everyday purchasing habits. Advertisers and other individuals can learn a lot of information about you by just tracing your everyday purchasing habits. And then the visibility of the balances basically exacerbates these other issues. So they not only know what you're doing, but also the amount and magnitude of which you're doing them. So then they'll suddenly know your wallet balance. You're at a coffee shop, you make a payment. Well, now they know your. Do you want to reveal your wallet balance every time you do that? It's not very practical. And it might lead to targeted crime based off people who have like a large source of funds, where they might be the target of malware and robbery. So it's important to consider. And they also know like how much you pay your employees with cryptocurrency and how much you charge your suppliers and customers, which really, really breaks down your business competitive advantage if that information is public. So even if you don't care about privacy for the sake of really your own personal right to privacy, there's a lot of reasons why you would want it for some practical reason. If you're starting a business, if you work on an existing project, if you're building a blockchain implementation where you have to deal with a lot of suppliers and you don't want your suppliers to get additional power over you, it's important to keep privacy in mind for any of these implementations. So, you can try and add privacy to a transparent system as an opt-in layer, but the effectiveness is very murky, to put lightly. So let's say you have this big black box of all the transaction, all the information that's being sent in the blockchain, and then you just have this little square orange tumbler mixer, ZK snark. It can be any sort of technology that provides privacy. And we can even assume that like this system is perfectly private. Let's say that when you're in that system, it's totally good. So if you send a transaction within the system, we can say, yeah, if the system is sensible, right? Maybe for certain mixers it might not make sense, but if you're using a state-of-the-art ZK snark or other technology, if you're interacting entirely within the system, we can say, yeah, for the sake of this presentation at least, you're pretty good. But if you start interacting between this layer and the transparent layer, well, now you have a million questions. Well, where did you get the funds from? Where are you sending them to? Can you trace the amounts? It gets really, really chaotic very quickly. And so that's why I say your privacy is probably pretty limited, or at the minimum, it's complicated. You can't give a really simple answer because it's really hard to tell based off use cases. And of course, if you send a transaction entirely within the transparent system, it is by definition transparent. So you shouldn't expect much privacy there. So when people talk about the sort of privacy debate, you need to look further than just saying, oh, well, we have this excellent solution we can bolt on. Okay, well, how does that interact with your existing system? And it's often the case that it does not interact very well. And there's a lot of leaked data in that process. But privacy isn't always everything. Sometimes it's good to be optionally transparent. This is one of my new slides for you that are already experts. So suppose that you have a private transaction, but you want to reveal to some individuals information about it for any number of purposes. Maybe you're a charity, maybe you need to prove a payment, who knows. But it's, a lot of cryptocurrencies have it such that it's either fully private or it's fully public. So now everyone in the world gets to see it. And that doesn't really make sense. So with cryptocurrencies like Monero and Zcash, we have a system where you can optionally reveal some information to specific people. Monero, I've showed it here with the view key. The amount here can be visible with the view key under certain circumstances. I can talk about those after. But in most cases it isn't. But you can use the view key plus the key image in order to reveal the amount to people. But to the rest of the public, they still don't get to see anything. So we acknowledge that privacy is very important for many people, but also transparency as an option is important to people too. But people don't need to be forced to suddenly reveal all information to all people. They just need to reveal information to those that need it. And I think that's really important. Monero does this again with the view key and also the key images for revealing even more information. And one final note I want to make too in this whole basic privacy section, but zero knowledge does not equal perfect. Like ring signatures, for example, are an example of a zero knowledge proof, and they aren't perfect. Zcash has zero knowledge proofs, but they're not widely implemented, and they still have a turnstile migration process, which isn't perfect. So zero knowledge is a subset of technologies, and you might hear the phrase zero knowledge. It's used to imply that you can prove something without revealing information used to prove that information. So if I'm going to a bar, I need to prove that I'm 21 so I can drink, but I don't, in this case, would not have to show my license, right? Or I wouldn't have to reveal where my residential address is to prove I'm 21, as an example. But there's certainly limitations to zero knowledge, and even if the implementation works really well, there's still a ton of other considerations. Privacy is not something you just one stamp and done. It's an ever-expanding web of considerations. So I'm going to do a little bit of basic privacy solutions to consider. I know this is a Monero meetup, but I wanted to give a little bit of a high-level overview first. So there's Monero, which I'll be talking about this in much more detail later. They use technologies like ring signatures, ring CT, and stealth addresses. You also have Zcash, which uses optional ZK snarks, where you can send funds within a fully shielded pool or in and out of a shielded pool within ZK snarks. We can talk about that later if you want. On a completely different note, you have a project called Enigma, which focuses more on file storage. So they use a blockchain to store hashes that is complemented with an additional database. I'm not going to touch on this much more, but if you're focused on a storage sort of solution rather than a transaction-focused solution, this might make sense for some business applications. And then in the coming soon world, you have ZK Starks, which are similar to Snarks, but ideally they have better trust requirements. They're just not really at the point of efficiency yet, but there are companies like Starkware that are already trying to monetize these sort of models and build upon them. So this is, in a small snapshot, sort of what your privacy ecosystem sort of looks like now within all blockchain type projects. There's of course a million other people doing different things, but even if you just understand these four basic things, I think you're good now and in the next 5 years, really. I started adding this slide because I think it's good to sort of help you map things out. So I have this privacy matrix where on one side you have what is the accessibility and usability of using whatever best sort of privacy system is in this system, and then what's your reasonable theoretical maximum privacy you can get out of it. So you can see like Bitcoin and Dash over there have, like, they don't really have a strong privacy solution, but they're pretty easy to use, so they're pretty high up there. And then Zcash is still much harder to use a privacy solution than Monero, but if everybody theoretically used the zero knowledge proof, if every transaction was a fully shielded transaction, then this would be a totally different discussion, and I think that can be sort of seen there. In Monero, the ring signatures certainly are eliminated, and we can talk about that later, but it still provides a much higher, like you can see relatively there, a significantly higher degree of privacy, and it's far easier for people to use, so it might still have a better impact. And then on the news recently, since Grin launched, I have to throw that in there. So it has the ability to perhaps be a little bit more accessible and usable than Monero is in its current form, but it's basically Monero without the ring signatures, so it certainly falls short on transaction graph analysis sort of protections. So I want to give a few thoughts on some of these comparison charts. Often you will be searching about new technologies and you'll stumble across one of these, or they'll throw out some existing coins and then they'll be like, oh, but we have masternodes with a 200% ROI, right? You have people that sort of put all these charts in, and they don't really make much sense, but it's important to sort of throw in there. So in terms of the context of evaluating these discussions. So be careful when you're looking at these, perhaps to sort of exaggerate it a little bit more, right? You have like Zcash versus Monero and build like Bitcoin code base like CheckNX, or like the funds developers, like this is obviously an exaggeration, just to emphasize the point. And then here you have like a chart that makes literally no sense, where it's like what even is the time warp attack that they sort of discuss, or like what does minimal fees even mean? Who determines what a minimal fee is? So long story short, comparison charts are usually very misleading and you shouldn't really worry about them. So with that in mind, okay? So in this case, I'm trying to focus on what the sort of main, ultimately what the bottom line is. I'm not going to say like, oh well, we have the super Wraith protocol enabled, so it's better, right? So instead, let's focus on how well these solutions sort of protect certain things. So for source of funds, right, Monero has what I would call decent protection, where if you're a normal person that's transacting, ring signatures are pretty good, but they certainly fall short of solutions that use a larger anonymity set per transaction. So that's something that I put under, like, if you're a normal person transacting, you don't need to worry about it. If you have a really strict use case, you need to think about it. And like Zcash, if you're using, I sort of shared Bitcoin and Zcash. So this is Bitcoin and Zcash transparent. This is Zcash fully shielded. So with Zcash, they don't protect any of this info here, but it protects this info really well for the source, receiver, and amount if it's fully shielded. And then Pivx, thrown on there because they're sort of trying, they're at least trying. But if you shield the funds, it generally protects the source. Regarding, I should have gone in a different order with these, I apologize. So, I'm actually going to start over. So, Monero provides decent protection for the source of funds. It protects the receiver and the amount very well with stealth addresses. The transaction size is not very small, but it's not terribly large. The verification time is in the larger milliseconds range than others, so it's a concern. And the signing time is very short. With the transparent, of course you don't hide any of this. The transaction size, though, is really small and it's very fast to verify. These are very efficient because they don't have any other information to hide there. With Zcash, fully shielded, it protects a lot of this information really well. The transaction size is still quite small. It's very fast to verify. And they definitely brought down their signing time, but it's still orders of magnitude larger than most. Yes?
Is that 2.3 seconds for mobile wallets as well?
That is with a test bench server, so it is not with a mobile wallet. It might be longer in a mobile wallet. It might be within the realm of reason at this point after Sapling, where you can do it on mobile. Honestly, the biggest advantage for getting involved on mobile, I mean, sure, the computation time is important, but you no longer need to run a full Zcash full node to sign these. You used to, and that's the biggest reason that Zcash is more viable on mobile now. Is you no longer need the full node.
But there are no mobile wallets doing shielded.
There are currently no mobile wallets in Zcash that support fully shielded. So this is, again, this is not a test bench type server. It's not real life use. I'm sure people are on desktop receiving, on most desktops, seeing similar numbers, but hasn't been widely tested on mobile. And then Pivx, one thing I did not actually know is that they did not hide the receiver because they don't actually use stealth addresses by default. And I sort of overlooked that. So it's some weird point to come across. And the amount is denominated. This is what Monero used to do with its ring signatures, and that's terrible because it's first of all, it's restrictive because you can only send, like, imagine giving someone $5 but never being able to get change in smaller increments. And then also, if you're sending like 100, 10, and 5, like, you still have a good idea of how much people are spending. So even if it's denominated, it doesn't do a really good job hiding the amount. And the transactions are very large. I have no idea what the verification time is, so I can't comment. And the signing time is quite large too. So these are some of your existing projects that at least have done some privacy-related things. And I think Monero and Zcash are certainly the leading privacy coins in this regard for transactions. So, time to talk about the implementations with Monero. So Monero attempts to hide information for the whole breadth of the transaction that you're going to send. The sender is hidden with ring signatures. The amount is hidden with ring confidential transactions, which is like confidential transactions with Bitcoin. It's a completely misleading name. It should be called confidential amounts, not confidential transactions. Monero is working to hide the transaction broadcast with a variety of things I'll talk about later, with an I2P Tor dandelion sort of setup, and then the recipient is hidden with stealth addresses. So I'll do a brief overview on how this works. So first with ring signatures and ring CT. I would like you to think of the entire US dollar money supply all in this room. You had all of it in one spot. It's denominated in different dollar bills and different coins. Monero is denominated in denominated and stored in outputs. So these outputs are like dollar bills, like coins. So you might have one output that contains 10 Monero, one output that contains 2.36, whatever long trailing number of Monero. And they can only be spent once. They're one-time use. So once you spend this money, you need to create new outputs to allocate where the money gets returned to. So the way ring signatures work, suppose I have this highlighted red output. It's as if I had changed my wallet. I have the right to spend it. What I do is I look at the blockchain and I pick other outputs that other people presumably have, and I don't need their permission to do this. This is totally non-interactive. I can do this offline with a copy of the blockchain. And what I do is I make it appear as if all of these outputs could be spent in the transaction. So again, you have yours, you grab all these, and all of these are possible spends. There's actually 11 of these, but I don't have room anymore to include all of Monero's ring size on here. I've updated it for 7, but there's no more room. In this case, apparently I didn't update. My apologies. So it used to be 7, now it's 11. And Monero proves that you can't spend other people's money, because you need some check to make sure that you're actually spending money that you have. So they use this key image, which is like a hash. It's a reference to the actual output that you do have, and that confirms that you're not just using other people's money on the blockchain that you don't have the actual right to spend. So the ring signature basically comes together and makes it so that multiple sources of funds are possible spends and hides among all of these. And then the ring CT component comes in and then it hides the amount that's being spent. So instead of revealing how much is spent in this output, you do a cryptographic commitment to say, I'm going to pay a certain amount, but I'm going to hide what that amount is. So in a very simplified form of this Peterson commitment, ring CT is really complicated, but ultimately it's sort of like you have the real number. So if I'm sending 10 Monero to someone, that's the real number, and I hide it by adding this random number to it that only I know, and then I publish the sum of those to the network. So if I'm, again, sending 10, I do a random number generator, find 100, 110, I give that number to the network, and I use that random number for the set of inputs and outputs to make sure that they both add up to equal the same amount. So that way, we can use ring CT to make sure that people are not generating money out of thin air in the process as long as math holds up there. So ultimately, all this comes together. There's a ring CT, ring signature that signs the difference between these commitments, and you result in an unknown amount of Monero going to someone. And you have this commitment public key, which is used for ring CT to prove you did things correctly, but I won't really focus on that because it's not a cryptographic presentation. Any questions on ring signatures and ring CT? I'm talking a lot here. Okay, so to simplify it, it sort of works like this, right? Where you have, with Bitcoin, you have one person that clearly signs a sheet of paper, basically signs a check to authorize it. With Monero, you have a group of people that all appear to be possible signers. You don't know which one of them is reaching under the table to sign that transaction. But you know one person is, and you can verify that it's still authentic. And as you can see how this person is unmasked and these people are masked, you don't know the wallet address or anything of the person who signs this to, because you already have other protections. One thing that's note, because this is sort of misleading with the picture, is that it is not interactive. You don't need to actually get people in a room and sign something. It's all non-interactive. But that's a simple way to think about it. So I think it's cool too to look at the history of how outputs are used on Bitcoin and Monero to get a better idea. So you have your one input that you're using, your $10, your one Bitcoin that you're spending, right? With Bitcoin, it's pretty clear. If it appears in a block, if this output appears in a block, you know that it was in a transaction from address A to address B. There's no other time that output would ever appear in the blockchain. And this is just older and newer blocks of the blockchain. Well, with Monero, instead of it only appearing once, it would appear several times. It would appear in several transactions. And as a result, you no longer know that in this transaction the output was spent from user A to user B. You don't know that the output was spent at all. It could have truly been spent, or it could have simply been used as a decoy in someone else's transaction. And chances are, it's most likely used as the decoy in someone else's transaction. So you can't simply say, I'm going to track this output and see when it's used, because you don't know when it's used. You know when it could be used, but you don't know when it actually is used. So that's a big difference between Bitcoin and Monero, and sort of helps speak to how, as someone's trying to look at the history of how outputs are used, it's hidden among a lot of other possible information. All right, so finally, self-addresses. This hides where funds are going to, in the simplest sense. So again, you start in with your sort of ring signature, you have your unknown amount of Monero, you have, you create 2 stealth addresses. Instead of sending money directly to an address that's transparent for people to see, you essentially create a one-time safety deposit box where you put whatever Monero you want in there, you lock it with the key that the recipient gives you, and then you just sort of leave it in a field with a ton of other outputs, a lot of other lines, just this big safety deposit box field. And the recipient just goes, checks all the boxes that are available until their key works and opens one, and that's how they know it's for them. So there's no message that necessarily shows up that says like, you've got mail, like on the recipient's wallet, unless they're specifically searching the blockchain to figure out which outputs are theirs. So in this case, I have the most common example where one of the outputs is going to the recipient, and one of the outputs is going back to the sender as change. So as an example, if I have 10 Monero, I only need to send 5 to someone. I can send the remaining 5 back to me as change. It's directed at me, but you don't actually know it's directed at me. And then one thing I think is pretty cool, since I did not know, I knew there was a fee, but I didn't know for the first few years when I was trying to learn Bitcoin how it really worked out. But there's a difference that is included is taken as a fee, but it's not a separate output per transaction. It's just included in the one output block reward for that block. So it's just kind of wrapped in there. Any rounding error or any fee is included in that one output. So, summary. To an outside observer, you see a bunch of inputs that are possible spends in the transaction, and then you have an unknown amount of Monero that's being spent, and you have these going to unknown people. The insider, of course, can see that this is a real input that's being spent, and they know where these outputs are being allocated. But things get really complicated quickly for this sort of graph analysis, and we wish they would be even more complicated, but they already are still pretty complicated. Say you have your one given transaction here. Well, each of these outputs have, they were generated in other transactions. So, each of them came from other transactions that each had their own set of outputs, and each of these had their own set of rings, so you don't know necessarily what happened in most cases. And for the outputs you generate, these will be used in multiple transactions too. So in this case, you pulled this output, well, it was also used in this transaction, and it looks pretty similar to yours. And then the outputs you generate will be used in other transactions too. So for every single one of these outputs, there's a web of other transactions where they are included. And so as a result, as people use Monero and transact Monero more frequently, you get more outputs, you get more people using these outputs in rings, and therefore it gets pretty complicated fast because there's a large number of possible spend patterns that could occur. So Monero gains a strength in numbers by having so many people interact through the ring by sending transactions. So this is a fun slide for today that I spent a lot of time working on. So network metadata. Monero, going forward, needs some way to better hide the network metadata. So if you're sending a transaction from your home, and you need some way to tell the network, hey, include this transaction in the next block. Well, you're leaking information as you send that information to the network. You're leaking most notably what your IP address is. And we need some way to hide that information. So there's a few proposals, essentially, for how we can best address this problem. And there's ClearNet, which is sort of a current situation without Dandelion. And then you have ClearNet with Dandelion ++, and then you have Tor and I2P. So I'm going to walk through all these pretty in detail. Has anyone never heard of Tor? Okay. So if you've never heard of I2P before, for the purpose of this presentation, think of it as like Tor. So ClearNet, how it works is you have this origin node, and you're connected to a few nodes. You send out your transaction to all the nodes you're connected to. So if you're connected to 3 nodes, by default you're connected to 8 nodes. But you would send out the transaction to all these nodes, and then these nodes would then relay your transaction across the rest of the network until most people had it. And then it would be mined, and then everyone would have it, and so on and so forth. The problem here is that you would leak your IP address to the 3 nodes you were connected to. Now, these nodes don't necessarily know that you were the one that sent it. They don't know that they are directly next to you. They might think they're this node over here, in which case they would have received the transaction from this person, and I mean, obviously this person did not truly send the transaction. So there's certainly some degree of uncertainty here. But if an attacker was running a ton of these nodes, they'd have a good idea. So one proposal is saying, okay, well, we can just modify how this sort of works with a protocol called Dandelion. This is used in Grin, it's used in a few other test projects. And what happens is you basically say, okay, I'm going to choose essentially two nodes that I'm going to send the information to first, and then they're going to broadcast the information to everybody. So I pick a node, I send that information only to them, and then they send the information to another node, and then they go crazy. Right? So the broadcast to a wide network doesn't occur until this step. And so you still leak your IP address to this node, but you only leak it to one node instead of 8. The problem, there's still some concerns about network resiliency. Suppose this one node didn't like you for some reason, that would complicate things. So there's certainly some drawbacks to that method, but it limits the scope of how much metadata you leak. And then you have the sort of Tor method that Monero has been working on for a while and will be available to individuals in the next release. So where there's circles or normal nodes, I made these pentagons be hidden in some nodes. They're either Tor nodes or I2P nodes. And what happens is you send your transaction to these through the Tor network to these Tor nodes. They're not Monero nodes. And then once it gets to the final exit node on Tor, they would send information to other Monero nodes and it would propagate it among other Monero nodes in the network. So what happens here is, the benefit here is, you send a message to the first relay node on Tor, they do not know that your message is a Monero message. It's an encrypted message, they don't know what packet of information is. For all they know, you're trying to download a torrent or something. They have no idea, right? But you're trying to access Google. And then they pass the message on to the next participant, who then unwraps it, sends it to where it needs to go, but they no longer know that it came from you, they just see the previous sender, they see the relay node rather than you. So it certainly helps protect what IP it comes from. And then you have the I2P type solution. And this one looks a little bit crazier. So you have this origin node. Say you want to get the messages out to these other nodes in the network. So what you do is you create an outbound tunnel within the I2P network. So you send it to I2P participants. So in this case, gray pentagons are I2P nodes that are also Monero nodes, and black pentagons are only I2P nodes, they're not Monero nodes. So you would send your information going out to the I2P network, and then you would send the inbound tunnel going to another person running I2P, and then they would receive the transaction broadcast through this layer. So you can see, similar to how it worked with Tor, right? I send a message that people don't know what they're actually transacting. Like, for example, this person is also a Monero node, but they don't know I'm sending a Monero packet of information, so they still need to eventually get the transaction broadcast through some other way. And in this way, by using so many layers, you're able to hide a lot of the network metadata, so it's hard to tell where it comes from. And similarly, they could then broadcast it to someone else over I2P, or they can just use the clear net to send that information over. So this is a long slide. I normally don't go into this much detail about metadata in these talks, but this is really the next big thing that Monero's been working on for the past several months. And so it's good to sort of talk about what the sort of options Monero has for implementing this network metadata. And ultimately, it's probably going to be like an I2P type system by default for most people, with an option to still use Tor and Dandelion. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. The good thing is these aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, for a network to use widely. You can still have a node that supports I2P and Dandelion. So that's something that we're certainly interested in doing, because there's a variety of use cases out there. All right. Sorry. Okay. So I must have copied it twice. Okay. So available wallets. There's a ton of wallets available. One of them is Cake Wallet, which we highly recommend you download. It's on there for a while. There's your Cake Wallet screenshot that you're required to see with I10. There's also other wallets. There's Monero, which is a lightweight wallet. Cake Wallet is not a lightweight wallet. It's a full wallet. Monero makes some privacy trade-offs for the sake of being more efficient and easier to use. And then there's moneronews, which is an Android wallet. And there's still work in progress on the custom Monero hardware wallet. And it also works on Ledger. With the next update, it will work on Trezor. So if you have a Trezor, it will work on it. I think the Model T only happens originally. Okay. So things going forward. Big thing is efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. So Monero has always worked to try to make its transactions more efficient. And here are some of the relative benefits that you've seen over different versions. The current version is this orange. So this 0.12 was Monero without bulletproofs. So this gives you an idea. With bulletproofs, it really shrunk the transaction size and verification time by like about 70 to 80%. So it got a lot smaller. Going forward, yeah, it was huge. For 0.14, the transaction size will get like about 5% smaller still. It's a very small amount smaller. But the range through verification time, which isn't the entire transaction, but it's an important part of the transaction, will decrease another 60%. So it's getting a lot easier to verify too. So you can see it's sort of the relative difference there. And then one of the cool new features of the new release is that you can run a pruned Monero node. This basically means that instead of storing all of the information, you just store the most relevant information that would be needed for you. So you'll store the most recent set of information. You'll store information to make sure that you won't accept a double spend transaction. And you'll accept a certain window at random so that you can still help others sync based off your node data. But you no longer need to store 65 gigabytes on your computer. Instead, it'll be about 25 gigabytes if you want to run a pruned node. So this means it might be possible to run a Monero node on an SD card on your phone, or any number of circumstances where you have lighter requirements, or maybe you just don't have 65 gigs on your hard drive, you only have 20 gigs or whatever else. So it allows you to run one of these pruned nodes. Now, of course, pruned nodes are not a replacement for full nodes. You should run a full node if you can. But this increases the opportunity for people to run full node, pruned nodes, which is better than them using a remote node. So it helps people with those options. Other things going forward, usability. We have a great Monero GUI team now. They sort of assembled about in the past year. They've got a lot of work done, so they redesigned every single one of the startup interfaces. So if you've ever used the GUI, it's going to look totally different for the next update. They added a merchant page for the receive function so that it has a live sales tracker.
When is the ETA on the import model on the new one?
So the new the hard fork is in April, so it'll be about a month before. So sometime March, very early April maybe. A lot of these features are already merged into master though, so you can either download it from the build bot, which is a pre-compiled binary, or you can build it yourself. And certain things like scanning QR codes on your with your webcam and other things that you can optionally use. There's a lot of work that's been gone into making the GUI itself easier to use. And on a personal note, payment IDs are terrible. So, William, how many of your Cake Wallet support tickets are related to people not using a payment ID? A lot. Okay. So, with Monero, we need some way for merchants to identify who makes payments, since they can't just look at the blockchain and figure it out. So there needs to be some other way to do it. In the past and currently, people use payment IDs, which is a random string that you include with the transaction in order to prove the link. So if I need to pay William money, for instance, he would give me a string, say, hey, include this in the transaction as you're sending it. I would include it, and he would then therefore know who this from encrypted manual field for something simple. And there are better ways to do that. Standalone payment IDs really sucks for a variety of reasons. Integrated addresses are far better from a user experience standpoint. And ideally, we can move to sub-address only, which helps people with privacy, overall helps the network have better privacy. So that's something, this is a discussion that's been going on for many months, and hopefully we can get services to upgrade and get on it. Also, sidechains. So Monero doesn't only need to work on Monero. So there's the intent is for Monero to support any sort of sidechain project you want to build on top of it. So Tari, for instance, is a minimal sidechain that works with Monero. Their intent is to allow you to atomic swap from Monero into Tari on their own dedicated blockchain that runs Mimblewimble, and you can interact with their ecosystem and then come back whenever you're done with it. So this will allow Monero to sort of get the best real privacy and best usability depending on what your use case is, where the chain itself can be secure, but you don't necessarily need to wait for confirmation from the blockchain if you're just buying coffee. Like, you don't go to the store, they swipe your credit card, but they don't make you do your signature and like wait until like the period where you can't argue the claim anymore. Right? Another announcement too is that Monero is changing the name of its form funding system. It's no longer going to be the form funding system. It's called the Community Crowdfunding System. And it's been redesigned. It's fully functional. Diego showcased this a few days ago. And it allows you to have the same functionality as before, but it's completely tracked with a GitLab. So you can see exactly who updates what, when things are moved, when payouts occur. And it's a far better experience than what the current form funding system is now, where there's a ton of spam and other things. So this is a far better solution going forward. The design has taken months. The implementation has taken even more months. But perhaps even best, this system is sub-address only. So it's completely gotten rid of payment IDs. It's totally sub-address only. So that's really awesome. Leading the way rather than just being a little bit behind. All right, and I want to leave on a quick note that you can use a service like xmrnews to easily make payments to a Bitcoin address with most of the privacy of Monero. This is integrated in Moneronews and also integrated in Cake Wallet. So if you scan a Bitcoin address with your Monero wallet and want to pay it, you can use this service in order to instantaneously convert your Monero to Bitcoin. And this website even has like an available Tor site, so you can access it over Tor, so you can hide your IP, and then you get the same level of privacy, making a Bitcoin payment that you would with Monero. So if you need to make a sensitive sort of Bitcoin payment, I certainly would recommend making it, using Monero to make your Bitcoin payments, so to speak.
Can I get that right? Can I get the 016 file?
Oh, yeah, that is not a current exchange rate, unfortunately. So ultimately, to sort of end like why Monero, right? So one thing, it's very community driven, right? Like I don't work for Monero. I think it's fun to talk about Monero. Vic thinks it's fun to spend money out of pocket for people to come and talk about things and buy and eat pizza and get free books, right? But in many ways, it's a challenge because you have all these stakeholders that sort of informally come together, and it's really hard to come to agreement on different things. But in some ways, that's a strength. As long as you can find a way to manage that as well as possible, and we really try there, then you can. It allows you to have a system that really isn't answerable to any individual person or organization. It's a real group of people that are truly passionate and have come together to really for really the sake of providing financial privacy, because we think it's really important for people. And then also because Monero is fungible. When you transact, you don't need to worry about receiving tainted coins. I know people often think about, oh, well, fungibility is only important if you're sending tainted money. Well, no, you don't want to receive tainted money. So if there's a discrepancy in the private money and the regular money, you still have to check to make sure you're not receiving bad regular money. So, or maybe you don't want to take private money. So it's best to have a system that's fungible out of the box. And then also, it really provides some of the best privacy claims in the space now, where you can use Monero now, and without really thinking about it, you can have a high degree of financial privacy in your life. And we're at a point where it's the easiest to use it's ever been, and we hope to keep making it easier to use going forward. So, thanks for coming to the presentation. Hopefully it wasn't too boring. There's a getmonero.org website. A large portion of the Monero community is on Reddit. There's a lot of help for common issues on the Stack Exchange. And if you need to contact me for some reason, there's my email address. Make sure you pick up a copy of Mastering Monero. It covers a lot more information if you want to read more about it. We also have a pamphlet if you want like the TLDR version, but make sure you grab both anyway. And Vic, what do you want to do with the t-shirts?
Cake Wallet shirts, I think there should be one for everybody. So we have medium, large, and extra large. So just grab your size. Just grab one. I think there should be one for everybody. Hopefully everyone gets one. Books, there's more than enough for everybody, but just try to pick one. We can get around more people. But let's do a Q&A session. So good.
Yeah.
Anybody have questions for Justin or anybody?
What are you studying in Minnesota?
I am studying finance and management information systems. So I don't come from a computer science background. I've taken a few coding classes, so in some ways I can read some of the code, but not complex code. I come from more of a cybersecurity.
And when did you leave Minneapolis?
So right,
Yeah, for this job.
yesterday.
How cold was it?
Oh, yesterday was quite warm. It was 3 degrees when I left.
Okay.
That was very warm.
My brother's up there. So
Yeah, the day before was a nice -50. So that's.
I mean, one of the Celsius or Fahrenheit, because I don't think it matters.
Yeah, -40 Celsius is -40 Fahrenheit, so it's colder than that. It's remarkable. I'm gonna go back and be like, yeah, it's like 70 degrees warmer than when I left. Yeah.
If I want to get more involved with the developer community, how do I go about it?
Excellent. So have you heard of IRC before?
No.
Okay, so Monero has a lot of chat rooms where you can participate. All of the code is on GitHub, so if you just search Monero, you'll come across GitHub. But also, you can use a Mattermost. It's like Slack. You can use Slack or this thing like Slack. Mattermost.gitmonero.org. It's in the pamphlet. If you have that, it's in there. That relays to all the developer chats where you can hop in, participate. There's different meetings I recommend you attend. So on Sundays, like every other Sunday, there's a meeting where people come and talk about these things.
Anyone can attend it.
Yeah, you don't need to. Yeah, you can just show up. And even if you can't attend, I attend Monero-Dev. So if you have this pamphlet. If you're not familiar with IRC, on the back, there's this link for Mattermost. You create an account there, and it relays to IRC, so you can participate in the Monero-Dev channel.
It works through Slack also.
Yeah, you have to. If you use the Slack, you have to send me a message, and I'll have to invite you. You can do that. Also, there's other miscellaneous community meetings and things going on for dev specific. At minimum, if you could read the developer meeting blogs, that'll be a good place. Yeah.
Could you explain a little bit about the pruning? The reason I'm curious about that is that if you're throwing away transaction data to prune it, don't you need those to construct the depot transactions? Like, are you limiting the possible?
You still, so among the pruning data, you still keep the TXO set. So you still have the others that people can't use. Importantly, yeah, so like, if I guess from different perspectives. So if you are running a proof node and you're sending a transaction, you still have a copy of the TXO set that's available to you. And nevertheless, you still are likely to pick the most recent TXOs anyway, but you still have the whole set, so you can still do that. If you're running a remote node available over RPC, you would not use a proof node for that anyway. So you still have all the basic functionality you would expect beyond like a deep reorg over several days or something. Yeah.
Yeah, very good information. So do you know with companies like Elliptic or Chain Analysis, do you know if they have any particular insight into the Monero blockchain, or if they're just ignoring it and hoping it doesn't become more relevant?
I can't speak for them. I have like no information on them. My assumption is they likely have some sort of collaboration with some of the existing exchanges in the U.S. that support Monero, Kraken, Circle, Poloniex. But I don't know that those relationships actually really exist. They probably do.
Import paperboard information via webcam QR code scanning that's implemented in the new wallet.
So in the new wallet, it allows you to scan an address for an address to pay. I don't think it's currently been implemented where you can scan like a private key QR code that contains a private key into
Under the wallet.
into the wallet and store that
That's
way.
basically what I'm asking.
Yeah, I don't believe that.
Does the, you guys have any?
No, not yet, no.
So you can't like sweep a wallet yet by scanning.
Yeah, just, if a paper wallet is given to me and just want to scan the information and basically have it on the wallet.
I would have to check Moneronews to see what's supported, but normally the restoration process is typing in the mnemonic sequence. Yeah.
I agree. Great presentation. Thanks. For the Tor I2P or Dandelion, how's the performance? It's not the privacy, but the kind of speed.
It's a lot slower, ultimately. That's such a quick answer. So it would be great if we could say everything, like, oh, we'll just make it mandatory that everyone always uses this. That's not something we can do. With Tor, we're at the mercy of the existing capacity. So the problem is, as we start using this capacity, we're not contributing any more towards it. If you download the Tor browser bundle and start using it, you aren't also relaying information within Tor. You're just leeching off existing nodes. So there's certainly a limitation there we're concerned about. So if we suddenly add terabytes of bandwidth to this system, right, it's going to be burdensome for not just us, but everyone that's using Tor. With I2P, we have a little bit more flexibility because it scales with the number of users more nicely. So with I2P, you can't realistically use I2P to go to Google. You don't use it to go to normal ClearNet websites. You only communicate within I2P. So as a result, one of the things that they've done in their design decisions is that every participant in I2P also routes traffic through I2P. So every time we add more people participate. So it still is slow. It's in the kilobytes per second. So we're still worried about certain things like wallet sync. But for transaction broadcast, which is what we're really concerned about, that should be totally fine. Most normal block synchronization will probably still be done with ClearNet, at least by default. There should be an option to do it entirely within these more stupid systems, but it will be slow.
Just go to the technical notes as well too. One of the main problems with dealing with things before cryptocurrency occurs is what's called a Sybil attack, meaning that people can create what's also called a DDoS attack, where you simply flood channels and duplicate requests. Because of the nature of blockchains, every transaction you send is called Ehrenhofer, meaning once you send a transaction, it's complete. So a lot of duplicates that, a lot of duplicates that you would have if you're dealing with one of the, some of the middleware in these interactions. If you have a duplicate transaction through the blockchain, you can simply ignore it. So the blockchain nodes themselves can simply ignore all duplicates and DDoS attacks that occur, and ignore all of them.
Invalid transaction.
Right, an invalid transaction would be a duplicate of a previous transaction, so you simply ignore that. So when it comes to a lot of the problems with Tor, other middleware, you can simply ignore them from our nodes. So that's all it's a duplicate, I'll just ignore that. So you won't deal with any reason. So we're actually slightly better off.
With Dandelion, you can't validate that the transaction is valid for everyone. So you have a denial service edition where you can send fake transactions and then they'll be Dandelion nodes. That's why it's probably not good to turn it on mandatory now, because if we did, then any blockchain implementing Dandelion could potentially be DDoS.
Yeah, so to be especially clear, for the network layer type things, it's very difficult, to the point of impossible, to make something a consensus requirement. So you can set up default configs, you can set up different ways of people doing things, but there's nothing stopping someone from building their own wallet client and finding their own way to get a message out to the rest of the network. They can use a satellite, they can use whatever they want to use, right? So it's an important type of discussion in regards to wallet config, but there's no way to make things like Dandelion sort of mandatory requirement, because there's no way for other nodes to validate whether or not this requirement has been met. So
not yet. If you use a zero knowledge proof as another layer,
that would I anticipate it would not be worth that extra complexity. Yeah, and then you need to roll. Okay, that would be so messy. Network layer is weird because it's not something you see on the blockchain, but it's still something to deal with. It's important to note though that the network layer stuff is less important than the blockchain stuff, because when you do the blockchain, when you store data on the blockchain, it's stored for everyone to see. compare that to, I let 8 nodes receive information that they don't necessarily know is from me. It's a completely different ballgame. So it's important for sure, but it's certainly a lower priority than the issues Monero has already addressed. So someone has a cool new blockchain idea that is transparent but uses Tor. Just use Bitcoin. Any last questions? Yes, Sean.
When do you anticipate moving away from ring signatures?
No ETA.
What's the alternative?
There are, the Monero Research Lab is very interested in pursuing ring signature alternatives, or making ring signatures significantly better. For certain attacks, you need ring sizes greater than 1,000 in order to say you don't really need to care about anything. And we're not there yet with the efficiency of ring signatures. Now, the alternative in the meantime is basically churn, where users can create multiple rings where they exponentially grow the possibility set as they transact. But that's still not well defined. Things like ZK snarks have a trust requirement, and ZK snarks are even less efficient than ring signatures. So really, we're in a situation right now where we're currently using the best thing that we know still.
Maybe the bulletproofs themselves.
Well, Monero already uses bulletproof.
It uses the parameters. The thing is, bulletproof is a generic zero-knowledge construction. You could use it to mask errors as well.
There's certain ways. There are like I think it was even under the RTRS ring signature scheme. This is getting into a different type of ring signature construction, but that within that sort of realm of research, there's a different way of also doing a stealth addressing system that is specifically more efficient and also a little bit more codable privacy, depending on what your strict requirements are. But it that is well out. It's a lot of work. But like bulletproofs is easier than that by comparison. Yeah.
Are there any plans or research into like kind of the research requirements of full nodes? Because, for example, it seems like the transaction set can't be true at all because you're not sure if you can spend it or not. I'm wondering what other kinds of resource things would look for.
So at the moment, the pruning that has been implemented is very conservative. So among the data that's removed, it does it very lightly. It can get rid of, theoretically, perhaps even like double the information. So there's a lot more information that could be removed, but we need to test to make sure that it can reliably work. We're always looking for more efficient transactions, but in regards to nodes, we're mostly convinced that at this point, Monero is in a good enough state that it can scale with advancing hardware. Where I know Arctic Mind, who's a Monero 14 member, is very outspoken. This is his forte. He's really node infrastructure and scaling. He is convinced it's a non-issue, and it's certainly something that we want to keep requirements light, and we're continuing to find different ways to do that. But there's only so much you can do if you need an on-chain transaction, and there's only so much you can do pruning before the network becomes unstable. So people will probably look to second layer solutions as those are developed. So doing our best to scale with the information we can, but it's hard to say what the real limits are. We're kind of just guessing. But they certainly tested like. Yeah.
What if someone finds a way to like inflate like the Monero line? Would that be like automatic immediately or?
So it depends. So that's an unfortunate answer. So when you're using Monero, you're assuming that the cryptographic assumptions work. So there's no known way that we know where someone can exploit the network, but that's not a good security measure, right? So the way, like if there was an issue with the range proof, or if there was an issue with the key image, and there was a previous issue with some of these key images when ring CT rolled out, there's the potential for people to spend money that they can't. There's a potential for people to say 2 + 5 = 100, right? There's ways for people, if you're able to break down those assumptions, then there's a possibility for you to potentially create supply that is hidden in the moment. The good news is that if there was a sort of issue that we find, we can test to see if it was exploited. So it's not great news, but it was a sort of situation where Monero had an issue with its key image in the past, and we were able to test to make sure it was not exploited. And we were able to see as it was exploited on other cryptocurrencies. So it's not as, it's certainly not as transparent. It's one main reason, one large argument people have against using confidential transactions with Bitcoin, why Zcash uses a turnstile type process. So it's a trade-off, and at the moment we don't really know a good way to be both perfectly blinding and perfectly shielding.
More likely to be discovered on Monero than a pure individual chain because you are not throwing away information on your own. You've got, like, you can see the evidence is there on the blockchain for a set class of times.
It depends. But so both use the basic type of confidential transaction component.
Yep.
It depends on how they would hide their blockchain graph, which is, who knows. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm getting this completely right, but apparently I heard there was an issue with the wallet 12 version that came out when you sent an amount to an exchange like about 20 Moneros that would be 40 Moneros arriving. That was out there for a little while, and it was talked about executable that brought it up, and it was just talked about it on a chat channel.
Right.
I was wondering how can you get something.
But that wasn't the coin's fault, that was the exchange fault. The exchange is
Yeah, what was the issue with that, and how can something like this get out?
Yeah, so to give a little bit of background, it was not an issue with Monero's protocol, but it was an issue with Monero's wallet RPC implementation. So what happened was people were able to send a transaction with additional information, and the RPC client would interpret it in a way where it received deposits and it didn't. So there's some documentation on how that was potentially used. We can see transactions that included this extra information. We don't know the magnitude of these transactions because we can't see the amount. Some exchanges like Morph Token have been a little bit more transparent about how they were impacted, and so you can go based off that. But for the most part, we don't know who was impacted and what magnitude it was. So
they were valid transactions, right?
Yeah, I mean the transaction was valid, it was interpreted correctly. So what happened was there needed to be a patch for how the RPC clients interpreted information, and then once that was done, there's no further issue going forward. If a user attempts to do the same attack, the client will just say, nah, right? So it was certainly unfortunate that was not seen.
But it was patched pretty quickly, right?
It was patched, I mean, not soon enough because it was exploited, but with some exchanges, but it was patched shortly after it was discovered.
For accountability as well, the exchanges themselves knew how much the transactions were supposed to be for, and that was how much they actually were. So they had accountability for how much the difference was for their account.
Right.
So they knew.
So like if it said that you received 100 Monero and you actually received 50, then you can use that information in whatever you use.
There was no magical XMR creating that blockchain.
Yeah. The blockchain didn't add data, it was reported incorrectly in their account.
Is interpreted. The reason I sort of defer it to the exchanges rather than the implementation is that the exchanges could have done an extra check. They could avoid the problem. They were deferring the check to the software, which they probably shouldn't have done. They should have done the check themselves on their own.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, from practical purposes, unfortunately, a lot of people try to do that.
Exchanges probably aren't going to allocate those resources to the other than trust the.
They do now. I think in the best case scenario, what you had likely at the time was they'd have maybe like a daily audit to make sure things worked or something similar to be like, so this is what we received, like they manually calculate sort of what they received. But it's unlikely they would have had a real time second reporting to that. Maybe hopefully they do now, but again, I can't speak to exactly what they're doing. It's totally speculating at this point. Yeah, last comment.
Are you aware of the Loki project? So what are you thinking about it?
So Loki network has reached out to us in regards to some of the network stack implementations, And their stuff isn't production yet, so it's something that we're looking at. There's nothing that would prevent someone from using it if they wanted to. When they were sending transactions to our network, it's something that we can be open to once it starts being used and more rigorously tested. But at the moment, Java, sorry, not Java, I2P and Tor are really the best routes at the moment going forward. And again, there's not mutually
But do you think it's a viable project?
I don't know. I don't know much about Loki's project. The only thing I started to become familiar with is Loki network, specifically the network stack, and I still haven't looked very specifically into it. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Good spirited questions and debate. I love it. But unfortunately, I've only booked this place till 2 p.m. So it doesn't have to end. Like I say, you don't have to go home, but you can stay here. So thank you, Justin. And thank you all for coming. Sorry. Get me choked up. Too much pizza, I think. No, but seriously, thank you all for coming, and download Cake Wallet right now. And watch Monero Talk, watch Coffee Chat, watch Breaking Monero. And keep in touch. Look forward to all the news, and